Okay, today we're going to be learning Chagigah, Daf Zayin. Today's Daf is sponsored by the Hadran Zoom family in loving memory of Malcolm Mintz, father of their dear friend Elisa Hartstein. In the virtual Hadran room, you brought your father to life for us as you shared the beautiful story of his tireless activity on behalf of the Jewish community in Atlanta, and all with a charming Southern accent. His memory should be a comfort to you. Daf is also sponsored by Rachel Lopatin in honor of Shana Lopatin with lots of love, Ima and Abba. And there's a Daf is also sponsored by Mishpachat Levi, the Levi family, L'Refuat Miriam Bat Chana, among all the other cholim. Okay, we're going to get started with our Daf now on the very bottom of Vav Amud Bet. I'm reminding everyone the bookmarks, the order form is already up on the site. You can find it on today's Daf. There's a link for it. So if you're in today's Daf on the site, there's a link for the bookmarks. They're free. You can give a suggested donation to help cover costs. And if you're looking to sponsor, feel free to get in touch with us. And basically, they're going to be bookmarks, one for each Masechet of Seder Nashim with the key terms that you need for each Masechet. And that's it for the beginning. Okay. Tzanan Hatam. And by the way, the Learner's Tapestry also, that's up on the site. So we sent out links to it. So please join. That's our special project toward the Siyum of Seder Moed. Tanan Hatam, Elu Dvarim She'en Lehem Shiur. We now quote a famous Mishnah, which I referenced a few days ago, because I referenced it for the same reason the Gemara is, which is, it's a very famous Mishnah in the beginning of Masechet Pe'ah. Why is it famous? Because we say it every day in our davening. After we say Birkat Torah, we then learn something of Torah. So the thing we learn is this Mishnah, and you'll see why in a minute. If we're talking about Birkat Torah and learning Torah, it says here that Elu Dvarim She'en Lehem Shiur. These are things that have no requisite amount. HaPe'ah, v'habikurin, v'harayon, u'gmilu chasadim, v'talmud Torah. So Pe'ah, there's no requisite amount. What do you mean? What about 1/60th? So Rashi tells us, well, no, lo notnaba atorah shiur. The Torah didn't give it any requisite amount. The rabbis came and said, oh, you're supposed to leave a quarter of your field for the poor. Do 1/60th, but it certainly wasn't designated in the Torah. It just said, leave a corner of your field. Corner could be any amount. Habikurim, the first fruits. There it just says, take from the first of your fruits and bring them to the temple on the holiday of Shavuot. It doesn't tell you how much you're supposed to bring of your new fruits. Rayon, that's our topic of going to the temple. And we're going to have to see exactly what does it mean it doesn't have a requisite amount. We'll get to that momentarily. Milu chasadim, right? These are now two very obvious and important concepts, which is you can do as much chesed, right? There's no minimum, there's no maximum. Talmud Torah also, learning Torah, and that's why we say it in Birkat Torah, because it's about learning Torah. There's no requisite amount, okay? Which again, we're going to see. Requisite amount means a lot of things, okay? And it's going to be a little bit confusing because we're going to go back and forth a little bit with what it means by rayon. It could be there's no minimum. It could be there's no maximum. It could be that, what does it mean there's no maximum? Well, sometimes to do too much of something is a problem because we've learned Bal Tosi, for example. You can't, let's say, have 5 minim on Sukkot. Add something else to your the species that you're taking, right? The lulav, the etrog. You can't just add something at will because that's adding. So you might have thought that there's a requisite amount and you can't add any more to this, or it's just basically saying maybe keep going, right? Learn Torah, learn more, right? It's the kind of thing, chesed. Should do as much chesed as possible. So this could be interpreted in many, many different ways, that ein lo shiur. So Amar Rabbi Yochanan, and here you're going to see already they were confused about it. Kisvurim anu. Kisvurim anu means we thought. Okay, we thought that harayon ein lo shiur lamala v'yesh lo shiur lamata. We thought it meant, when we read this Mishnah, that it doesn't have a maximum, but it does have a minimum. And how do we know that? Well, we saw that in our Mishnah. Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel disagree about how much money you need to spend on your sacrifice. By the way, minimum and maximum in and of itself is not clear. Minimum and maximum could be, there's a minimum amount of money you need to spend on it. That's what it sounds like Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel are saying. Minimum could also mean how many sacrifices you're bringing. And that we're going to see further on, that maybe there's a minimum or a maximum about how many you're supposed to bring. So as opposed to how much you're supposed to spend on that animal, it's, can you bring as many olot riyah as you want? And then we're going to see that that's part of a debate, which is if I want to bring olot riyah every day of the holiday, I want to bring it multiple times during the week, am I allowed to? Or is it only one that I'm obligated to do? So it's going to be a little bit confusing today because they're going to throw around many, many different interpretations of what this minimum, maximum, and what are we talking about. So Rabbi Yochanan says, we thought that it meant it doesn't have a maximum. You can spend as much money as you want, but it does have a minimum. Until Rabbi Yoshaya Berebi came, really made and taught us. And he said, there's no shiur whatsoever, not minimum, not maximum. Now, how does that work out with Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel? So, so now it depends how you read this next line. Aval. Chachamim omrim. Now, if you notice, if you're in a regular Gemara, there's a little aleph next to chachamim, the word chachamim. And some people say it should read aval amru chachamim. Now, you'll tell me, what's the difference if it says the rabbi said or but said the rabbis, okay? I'm trying to translate into English. This doesn't translate well into English. Even in Hebrew, it sounds basically the same. Either which way the rabbis are saying it. So what's the difference? I'll tell you in a minute, leave you in suspense. So what they do here is they quote this. First, Rabbi Yochanan said, we thought there was a minimum and not a maximum. But Rabbi Yoshaya taught us there's no minimum, there's no maximum. And now it depends how you read this. And then, so if you say aval amru chachamim, that's read as aval amru chachamim means the rabbis came in and changed it. In other words, and now this could be like pe'ah. Pe'ah, we said the corner of your field, by Torah law, there's no minimum, there's no maximum. But the rabbis instituted, then you would kind of use the word instituted, not just said. Amru chachamim usually is used in the rabbis came and changed something. So the rabbis changed something and they decided we're going to give a minimum value. Okay? So that's one way to read it. If you say aval chachamim omrim, that order of putting the umrim after the word chachamim is saying the rabbis disagree with Rabbi Yoshaya. And the rabbis said, we don't agree. We think there's a minimum, not a maximum. And then obviously you would say that Rabbi Yoshaya just didn't hold by Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel. How he was able to do that is a good question, which is why I think the first explanation makes a little bit more sense. But then it's basically saying, well, the rabbis disagreed with that, the statement of Rabbi Yoshaya that ein lo shiur lo lamala v'lo lamata, and they said, no, there is a requisite amount. So now we have to understand my ha'ra'ayon. What is this ra'ayon? Rabbi Yochanan amar re'iyat panim b'azara means now we're going to all of a sudden, until now we've been saying me'ah kesef and shteh kesef, and we seem to be talking about the korban. Now Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish are going to have a debate about, and then we're going to have two different versions of what exactly each of them say. Rabbi Yochanan says when it says ha'ra'ayon here, ein la shiur, what it meant is re'iyat panim b'azara. It means you can come as many times as you want into the azara. There's no minimum, there's no maximum. Okay, there is a minimum, you have to come once, but you don't have to come any more than that. You can come more if you want. You can come as many times as you want. That's Rabbi Yochanan. Rish Lakish Amar, again, I'm explaining, although I really shouldn't explain yet, because we're going to see that there's many different interpretations about what exactly this is. The Rish Lakish Amar re'iyat panim b'korban. So the first thing we have to get about Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, I'm going to explain the simple and what is fact, and then what's going to be explanation. Fact is, Rabbi Yochanan says ra'ayon, where it says in this Mishnah, ein lo shiur, is referring to coming to the temple. Rish Lakish says it's referring to bringing sacrifices to the temple. Okay? If you say, by the way, it's coming to the temple, it almost sounds like, well, then it has nothing to do with how much money you spend on your korban. That wasn't what it was relating to at all. So now the question is, what exactly is their debate? The Gemara is going to bring one explanation. Then they're going to bring Rabbi Yochanan, Rish Lakish is going to question Rabbi Yochanan from three different sources, three different questions. Each time Rabbi Yochanan is going to have an answer. Rabbi Yochanan is going to question Rish Lakish from one source. And based on that, we're going to knock out the whole way we've understood this machloket, because Rish Lakish is going to make no sense at that point. We're going to bring a second interpretation of this machloket, what their debate is really about. And then Rabbi Yochanan is going to bring another question on Rish Lakish, but we're going to have an answer to that. And that's basically going to take us almost till the next mission. So my ha'ra'ayon, and you can see it charted out in the sheet, it'll also help you as well. So again, Rabbi Yochanan says it's coming to the temple. Rish Lakish says it's bringing the sacrifice when you come to the temple. So here comes the Gemara's explanation, the first one. Be'ikar haregel. Ikar haregel means the main holiday, which really means day number one. Okay, day number one, that's really when you're supposed to bring your sacrifice. When you come to the temple, you can't come empty-handed. Okay, right? I'm going to give an example to understand this. You go to someone's house for lunch on Shabbat, you get invited, you bring something, right? You don't show up empty-handed, you come, you bring something. Ki pligi, what's the machloket? B'shar yamot haregel. Okay, so the machloket is the rest of the holiday. So you've come your first day, you brought your sacrifice. What happens the next day? You're still in Jerusalem. You want to come to the temple again, right? Imagine you go to a friend's house every Shabbat in a row for 10 weeks. Are you going to bring a gift every single time you come, right? Oh, I already brought a gift. Well, I'm going to bring it every time, right? Once something becomes more normal, it's almost like, why are you bringing a gift again, right? You've already brought a gift. You don't need to bring me a gift every time you come to my house. So that's the machloket. Every time you come in, everyone agrees. If you want to go to your friend's house and bring a gift every single time you come, your friend will accept it. I mean, some people will say, no, I'm not accepting your gift, but it's rare that will happen. They might get upset with you that you brought a gift each time, but for sure you can bring it. So if you want to go to the temple and bring every day of the holiday and bring an olat riyah, go for it. Okay? That's this explanation. Wait till we get to the next explanation. We're going to explain it differently. But right now we're going to assume everyone agrees with that. So everyone agrees day number 1, you obviously come and you bring a sacrifice. Day number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, if you want to bring, go for it. But what's the machloket? The question is, what if you come without a korban on day number 2 or day number 3 or day number 4? To Rabbi Yochanan savar riyat panim ba'azara. When we talk about riyah, we're talking about coming to the temple. That ain't lo shiur. To kol ema da'ate lo tzarich ha'tuyeh. Every time you come, you can come as many times as you want. You don't have to bring a sacrifice every single time. Rish Lakish amar, no, riyat panim is bikorban. When we're talking about riyat panim, we mean with a sacrifice. So that means to call ema da'ate tzarich ha'tuyeh, right? There's a guard at the entrance of the temple that checks you. Do you have an animal? Are you bringing a sacrifice? You can go in. If you're not bringing a sacrifice, can't go in. Okay? That's the way Rish Lakish understands it. I'm not saying it was literally a guard, but that's the idea. That basically you can't go into the temple unless, right? He takes it very literally. Lo yera'u panai rekam. You can't come empty-handed ever, right? Some people say, and I know this is a debate in general about gifts, right? That if you're going to go to someone's house, you're going to bring them a gift no matter what. It doesn't matter how many times you've been to their house. It doesn't matter how close friends you are. It's not appropriate to walk into someone's house without bringing something. That's the idea here. Can't go into God without bringing a sacrifice. So again, you don't have to go in multiple times on the holiday, but if you go in, you can't go in without a korban. So that's the way they understand Rish Lakish. So now, and Rabbi Yochanan will say, no, you don't need to. So Rish Lakish, so now Eitive Rish Lakish the Rabbi Yochanan. Question number 1. I told you 3 questions Rabbi Yochanan is going to question, Rish Lakish is going to question Rabbi Yochanan. Eitive is a word that means we're going, first of all, the root is Yud Taf Bet, which is Taf and Shin, switch in Aramaic. It means Yashav, which means lahashiv. Lahashiv could be an answer, like a tshuva is also, but it's also lahashiv, like to return an attack on him, basically. So Eitive is I'm going to attack you from, it's always quoting a Tanaitic source to question an Amora. Okay, someone from the Gemara time period, which is Rabbi Yochanan in this case. So now, Eitive, our first question is, Eitive Rish Lakish the Rabbi Yochanan. Below yera'u panai rekam. Okay, that's pretty obvious, right? How do you understand? Don't come to God empty-handed. Amarle bi'ikar regel. Rabbi Yochanan says, didn't say you don't have to come with the korban at all. I just said on day number 1, you don't have to come with the korban. After that, on day number 1, you have to come with a korban. After that, you don't have to. You've already been there once. Eitive, second question against him. V'lo yera'u panai rekam bizvachim. Okay, so here it's very clear. We don't really have to continue, but we're going to continue anyway because they quote the whole Breita. It's a long Breita, but lo yeru panai rekam means you have to bring sacrifices. Zvachim usually means animals that you slaughter, not birds and not meal offerings. So you might have thought animals, or maybe you don't have to bring animals. Maybe for olot ri'iyah, maybe you could bring a bird. Maybe you could bring a meal offering, which is just made of flour and water and oil. So how do we know it's specifically Zvachim as the Breita started? This is a structure. That's a Midrash Halacha structure. It basically asks the question, gives an answer, and then starts to question. How do we know? This is the case, right? And it starts with the verse, and it begins with the verse, and then as opposed to the Mishnah that just tells you the halacha, usually not connecting it to a verse. This starts with the verse, tells you the halacha, and now starts questioning, is that really true? How do we know that? Maybe this. Vidinhu, well, it's logical. We have 2 korbanot that are somewhat parallel. We have the korban chagigah that we bring and we eat. That's korban shlamim. And then we have the re'iyah, the one that goes up to God. It entirely gets burnt. Now, you can entirely burn a bird. You can have an olat oaf. You can have a mincha that gets entirely burnt, right? There's different mincha offerings. Some get eaten by the people. Some get entirely burnt. So theoretically, you could have any of those options. But they say like this. We know that the korban chagigah has to be an animal. So now you're going to say, right? Just like the Chagigah, if we compare, Chagigah is for us, Re'iyah is for God. So now we're going to bring our Chagigah with an animal, which is obviously considered more respectful, it's more expensive, and then we're going to bring to God something less. That doesn't make any sense. So therefore, just like we have to bring an animal for ourselves, we also have to bring an animal for God. Umahen zvachim, what are these zvachim that we're supposed to bring? Olot, they're burnt offerings. How do we know they're olot? Again, the Braita is going to question. Maybe they're peace offerings that we bring to God. Vidinhu, again, it's logical. And it's logical means here we're going to make a comparison. Again, we're going to compare the Chagigah is to us. These are analogies. As the Re'iyah is to God. So now, what do we bring for a korban chagigah? We bring it as a korban shlamim, which means it's for us. Right? We're going to eat part of that. It's food that we can eat. Now here, obviously, God isn't eating it, but what does it mean? We burn it on the sacrifice. It all goes up to God. So if for us, we're going to bring a sacrifice that we can eat, for God, we're going to bring a sacrifice that he can eat. Again, God doesn't eat, but the point is, it all gets burnt. And also it makes logical sense, this whole thing. We're going to have a full table full of meat for the holiday, and God's table, which is the altar, right? That's why people say you don't sit on tables, because tables like an altar, right? God's table is going to be empty. Now, it would be totally empty because we burn parts of the korbanot shlamim on the altar, but the percentage of what we burn on the altar is much smaller, and it would be inappropriate that we have a big full table and God's table, the mizbeach, is empty. Okay, so that was all to prove. But again, the first line was really the important line, which is, again, lo yeru panai rekam means bring sacrifices. It sounds like every time you come, you have to bring a sacrifice against Rabbi Yochanan, who said only on the first day. So again, Rabbi Yochanan is going to be consistent. When it said bring animal sacrifices, it meant on day number 1. Rabbi Yochanan agrees on day number 1. You come into the temple, you bring animal sacrifices. Beyond that, you don't have to. A third question. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda Omer. In this source, we start with Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda. He says, Shalosh regalim b'shana nitztavu Yisrael la'alo b'regel. 3 times a year, people have to come to the temple. Chag HaMatzot, Chag HaShavuot, Chag HaSukkot. Okay, the 3 holidays. Ve'ein nir'im chatzaim. They can't come in halves, in parts. Okay, we're going to have to explain this later. This is going to be once we finish our sugya, we'll come back and explain this line. Mishum shenemar kol zechurcha, because it says all males. So put this on the side. We'll come back to it. Ve'ein nir'im reikanim, and they don't come empty-handed. Mishum shenemar lo yeru panai rekam. Again, you know where this is going. What's Rabbi Yochanan going to answer? This is not a question. Amar le b'ikara regel. Again, yes, reikanim means come with a sacrifice, right? Don't come empty-handed, bring a sacrifice. But Rabbi Yochanan says it's only on day number 1. You don't need to bring it every time you come to the temple. So 3 sources, it was all really the same idea. Rish Lakish said, look, it says you have to come with a sacrifice. Said Rabbi Yochanan, I agree with you about day number 1, and that's what all these sources were talking about. I just don't think for subsequent days you need to come to the temple. But now, Rabbi Yochanan, the Rish Lakish. Rish Lakish basically said every single time you come to the temple, you have to bring a sacrifice. So Rabbi Yochanan questions Rish Lakish and says, Yera'eh yir'eh. Remember, we had this before. We come to be seen, and we also come to see, right? This is from the fact that there's no vowels in the Torah, even though there are now, but that was a tradition. And the word could be read in 2 forms. It could be read as we're coming to see God and God is coming to see us, which is really a reflection of what's happening when we go to the temple. There's a relationship going on here from both directions. And before, we used it to learn about someone who's blind in one eye is exempt, because just like God sees us with his 2 eyes, therefore, again, which is weird because it's personification of God. But again, we can do that within a certain, way of understanding. Here also, ma'ani bechinam, afatem bechinam. Now, does God come with gifts for us when we come to the temple? No, right? Obviously, God can't, but let's leave that point aside. But we have to come to the temple the way God comes to the temple. So here it seems to indicate that we don't have to bring anything to the temple. Just like God doesn't come with anything, we don't have to come with anything. Ella. So therefore, Rish Lakish can't possibly say, no, again, what do you mean? Lo yeru panai rekam. But Rabbi Yochanan will say that's day number one. But what this means is that on subsequent entrances into the temple, I can come without anything, because if I've already fulfilled lo yeru panai rekam, you have to come with something. Once I fulfill that, I can come in anytime I want. The way God comes into the temple, he's there not bringing anything to us. We can come not bringing anything to him. In which case, they knock out Rish Lakish, because it can't possibly be, they believe right now, that Rish Lakish thinks that every time I come in, I have to bring something to the temple. So they're going to reread this. So that was the first interpretation. Remember, I want to go back. All we had that Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish said was, Rabbi Yochanan said, Riyat panim ba'azara, that Re'iyah means going into the temple. And Rish Lakish said, Re'iyah means sacrifice. And then the question was, what does it mean, Ein la shi'ur? Right? To which Rabbi Yochanan said, it means you could come in as many times as you want. You don't have to bring anything. Rish Lakish says, no, Ein la shi'ur, and then it's a little tricky. How does he understand? But what he means is, Ein la shi'ur doesn't mean you could do whatever you want. It means there's no limit. Every single time you come in, you have to bring another korban. Almost it's an obligation, according to him. Now they're going to reinterpret. Ella. Anytime you want to go into the temple during the week of the holiday, you can go in, you can go out. There's no guard making sure you have an animal with you. Nobody thinks you have to bring a sacrifice, because that's what the last source just said. You can come empty-handed, no problem. Remember, after you fulfilled your first day. So you can go in, you can show your face. That's what it means. Ayel, nichnas, mitchaze, you can be seen there by God, and nafik. And then you go out, no problem, without a sacrifice. Everybody agrees about that. What's the machloket then? Ki pligi da'ata va'aite. The question is, when you come and you bring a sacrifice on, let's say, every day of the holiday, Rabbi Yochanan da'amar re'iyat panim ba'azara, if you say harayon ein la shi'ur, there's no requisite amount, what he means is, re'iyat panim, now remember, what is rayon according to Rabbi Yochanan? To see the azara. What he's saying is, re'iyat panim hu de'ein la shi'ur. Going into the temple, you can go as many times as you want that week. Go in, go out, mashabalach, whatever you want. But halik korban yesh la shi'ur. But there's a maximum amount you can bring for the sacrifice. Now, here we're not talking about monetary value. We're talking about how many sacrifices. Some people explain here what he means is there's an issue of bal tosif. You're supposed to bring one sacrifice. That's it. There's one olat riyah. There isn't anytime you come in, you bring an olat riyah. He thinks there's a maximum amount, one and no more. It's like 5, of the minim on Sukkot. Can't bring 5. You can't bring a lulav, an etrog, hadasim and aravot, and something else. You can't have 5 boxes in your tefillin, right? 5 parshiot. No, not 5 boxes, 5 sections. So basically, we're going to say you can't have any more sacrifice. That's what ein la shi'ur. It doesn't mean there's no maximum. It means there's a maximum. In other words, you can't just bring as many as you want. So ra'ayon ein la shi'ur is referring only to going into the temple. It has nothing to do with bringing sacrifices. To bring sacrifices, for sure, there's a maximum. You can't bring more than one. And what's Rish Lakish going to say then? Rish Lakish Amar, remember, we can't have Rish Lakish say you're obligated to bring every time you come in, because we already rejected that. So what's he going to say? Rish Lakish Amar, Re'iyat panim bekorban. When it says a rayon ein la shi'ur, there's no maximum. It meant how many times you can bring a sacrifice if you wish. He doesn't think there's a bal tosif issue. It never says anywhere 4 specifically, like with the arba minim on Sukkot. Never says any number specifically. So you can bring as many as you want. Afilu korban nami ein lo shi'ur. He thinks you can come in as many times as you want. He thinks you can bring sacrifices as many times as you want. So if you want to keep bringing korbanot olah, burnt offerings every day of the holiday, multiple times a day, go for it. Rabbi Yochanan says no. 1, and that's it. And rayon ein la shi'ur is how many times you can go into the temple. You can go in as many times as you want. And then you'd have to go in empty-handed, because you're not allowed to bring this korban olah. So that's the new explanation of the machloket. On that, Eitive, on that, Rabbi Yochanan is going to question Rish Lakish now. Okay, you should not go into your friend's house too often. Like I just gave this example. You go every single Shabbat, right? Sometimes you feel like you've crossed the boundary. You've gone to someone's house too many times. You shouldn't make yourself so comfortable in someone else's house that you should go there all the time. It's a pasuk from Mishle. So they say this sounds like you shouldn't bring sacrifices all the time. You shouldn't consider yourself like a bat bayit, like this is your house in God's house. You have to have a certain amount of separation, of honor, of respect. That means don't overdo things. So that means you shouldn't be able to bring sacrifices anytime you want. So what's Rish Lakish going to answer? No, that's not talking about voluntary offerings, korbanot, burnt offerings. That you can do as much as you want. What can't you do? You can't bring too many sin offerings and guilt offerings. Why? Well, a few obvious reasons. Number one, if you have to bring all these guilt and sin offerings, it means you've done many things wrong. Number two, going back to what we talked about in Yeshayahu the other day, there's this whole concept of echtav ashuv. Oh, I'll sin, I'll bring a sacrifice. I'll sin, I'll bring a sacrifice. If you're constantly, it's like someone who says, I'm sorry so many times. It's very nice you're apologizing, but your apology means nothing if you keep doing it over and over and over again. So that is the problem. And that's what the pasuk is referring to according to Rish Lakish. But voluntary offerings, bring as many as you want. And now we're going to have a support from Rabbi Levi for this reading. And then we're going to have a support from a Braita, and that's going to end this section. The only thing that's left is to go back to that line about the chatza'im, about not going to the temple in parts, and what does that mean? So Kiddu Rabbi Levi, here's the strengthening of that answer from Rabbi Levi. As Rabbi Levi says, De Rabbi Levi Rami, Rabbi Levi brought a contradiction between two verses. He says, K'tiv, it says, which means don't go to God's house all the time, and presumably don't bring sacrifices all the time. And then it says in a different verse, I'm going to come to your house carrying many sacrifices. Olot, right? Burnt offerings. So it seems to say you can bring a lot of sacrifices. How do we resolve the contradiction? Okay, there's a split between ones that come because you did a sin and ones that are voluntary offerings, whether they're olot or whether they get fully burnt or they're peace offerings that you eat part of the meat. But those you can bring as many as you want. Tanya Nami Hachi, as I said, we're going to bring a Braita to support this. The Braita is going to say the same thing, just instead of starting off with a contradiction and then resolving it, they're going to do it in a bit of a different order. They already know the answer. They're going to say, that verse is talking about, this is the exact same structure as the earlier Midrash Halacha that we saw. Bring a pasuk, say what it means, and then question, is that really what it means? You say it's chatot vashamot, eno ella, but maybe it's olot ushlamim. Maybe you can't bring too many burnt offerings and peace offerings. Because it says avo beitcha ba'olot shalem lecha nedarai. Okay, here now we see the end of that verse, which is I'm going to come to your house with burnt offerings. I'm going to pay my vows. This is voluntary offerings. So therefore, hare olot ushlamim amor. There it seems to say bring as many olot ushlamim as you want. So how do I resolve the other pasuk? It must be okay. So there we resolved it. So again, we had two different explanations of the machloket. We had the machloket. What is ra'ayom when it says ein la shi'ul? Rabbi Yochanan said it means there's no requisite amount to how many times you come to the temple. Rish Lakish says it's how many times you bring a korban. We've tried to define it in one way. In the end, we conclude that what it means is Rabbi Yochanan is basically saying there's no requisite amount how many times you come into the temple, but there is a requisite amount how many sacrifices you bring. And Rish Lakish says there's not even a requisite amount how many sacrifices you bring. Okay. Next, so since we quoted this Braita and we didn't explain what that line meant, the Gemara wants to go back to it. Sava Rabbi Yosef Lameimar, just like we started our daf with, Rabbi Yochanan thought to say here also. Rabbi Yosef thought to say, but he's going to be proved wrong. If you have 10 children, you shouldn't go up chatza'in in parts. Don't bring 5 today and 5 tomorrow. So that's what we learned from the pasuk. Turning now to Amud Bet, Amarle Abaye. Abaye says, Pshita. That's obvious. You don't need a verse to tell you that, okay? Imagine the situation in your house. If you say, listen, on day number 1, I'm going to bring the 5 of you, and the other guys, you can wait till the next day, right? What's going to happen? World War II will ensue in the house. Right? It's very unfair how you're going to choose which 5 I'm taking one day, and we're going to call you, the ones in the first group, you're the Zrizim, you're the ones who are good and ready to go right away. And which one are we going to call the Poshim, the bad ones who are waiting till the second day? There's no way that would be allowed. You can't even imagine such a situation happening, which means obviously you can't do that, but you don't need a verse, kol zichorcha, to teach you. You have to bring your family all at once because that just wouldn't be a pasuk about that. Ela chalamayanta. So what's the verse coming to? And this we already learned. Kol zichorcha, what does it come to teach you? Everyone has to come together, which excludes all the people who smell bad. So we're going to get back to them. So now we're going to say that when it says chatza'in, it means don't come in parts, which means don't come in groups of people, those who smell and those who don't smell, right? The ones on the right are the ones who don't smell, and the ones on the left are the ones who smell, and split your people like that. No, the ones who smell bad just don't have to come at all. And that way, everybody comes together as one. So that's what we're going to read inside. Detanya acherim omrim, hamikametz, hamitzaref nechoshev ha'abursi pturim min ha'reiyah, right? All those people who are involved in work that makes their clothes smell, or their body smell, shene'ema, kol zichorcha, right? They're all exempt from re'iyah. They don't have to come because it says all males, which comes to include mi she'achol la'alot in kol zichorcha. Only ones who could come together with everybody. Yatzu elu she'en yocholim la'alot in kol zichorcha. Anyone who can't is excluded. And that is what they say that line meant. When we said in the Bright, I'm just trying to find it inside to read exactly. You don't come in parts. That comes to exclude all these people who have jobs that make them smell bad. Okay, which again, we discussed then, so I'm not going to go into it now. New Mishnah. Okay, the next thing, the background you need to know for this is what is Maaser Sheni, number one. Maaser Sheni is the second tithe. It's given in years 1, 2, 4, and 5 of the Shemitah cycle. In years 3 and 6, instead, you bring that 10th of your produce to the poor people. On years 1, 2, 4, and 5, you separate it. You're supposed to bring it to Jerusalem. If you live far, you can redeem it onto money. Bring the money to the temple and buy items with it. Now, what can you buy with it? So there's a whole list of different things that you can buy with it. And obviously, produce would be a good thing to buy. Also, meat for sacrifices, animals. You can buy animals with it. The question is, though, what sacrifices can you buy with it? Not all, because it's a principle that we're going to see inside, which is, I'll read it already in words, kol davar shebechovah, anything that's obligatory, eino ba ela min ha'chulin. You can't, now, Maaser Sheni, money is sanctified, has sanctity to it because it's a Maaser, it's one of the tithes you bring. Since it's sanctified, you can only, if you have something obligatory, you can't buy it you can't use your Maaser Sheni money to buy it because your Maaser Sheni money is sanctified already. When we say you're obligated to bring a sacrifice, it means you have to take something that's not sacred, money that's not sanctified in any way, and then use it to buy an animal and sanctify the animal. But you can't take it from something that already has sanctity to it. So that means that Maaser Sheni money can only be used to buy things that are not obligatory, that are optional, okay? So let's say, for example, what did we learn about? We learned that there's Korban Chagigah, there's Korban Olat Riyah, and there's Korban Shamei Simcha, right? To just have meat for the holiday. So obviously, what can you use with your Maaser Sheni money when you come to the temple, right? Many people, by the way, would come on the holiday with their Maaser Sheni money. They leave it at home for a while. They bring it to the temple on the holiday when they were going anyway, and they'd spend their money there. So what could you buy with that money? You can't buy your sacrifices that are obligatory, but you can buy your optional ones like the Shamei Simcha. So that's what our Mishnah is talking about. However, our Mishnah is going to be a little bit confusing. And we're not going to really understand it right away until the Gemara is going to come in and add all sorts of words to the Mishnah to make it make more sense. Olot b'moed ba'ot min ha'chulin. The Korbanot Olah, okay, which seem to be the Olat Riyah that we've been discussing, which is obligatory, on the Moed. Now, what does Moed mean? We know this from Moed Katan. It means Chol HaMoed, which is going to create a big problem. What about Olot on Yantif, right? So we'll get to that. That's going to be the first question of the Gemara. But right now, let's just read it simply. Korbanot Olah, you buy from Chulin. Why? Because they're obligatory. And we just explained, anything that's obligatory, you have to use non-sanctified money. So you take regular money, you buy your animal, and you bring it to the temple. Hashlamim, but the shlamim, which are the Shamei Simcha, that are just have extra meat around, that mina maaser, you can use your Maaser Sheni money to buy that. Yom Tov Harishon Shel Pesach, another strange thing. Why are we all of a sudden talking about just the first day of Pesach? And how does this relate to the first sentence? Not so clear. On the first day of Yantif on Pesach, Beit Shammai omrim min ha'chulin, Beit Hillel omrim min ha'maaser. You can buy the korban. We're going to see later, they're talking about a korban chagigah. You can buy it, according to Beit Shammai, only from chulin. Beit Hillel says from maaser, which was going to raise a big question. Isn't chagigah obligatory? How can you buy it from maaser? Also not very clear. Now they're just going to list all kinds of things that you can use for eating meat in again, there's an obligation to be happy on the holiday. Happy on the holiday means eating meat. So who gets to eat from what meat? So now we're going to see. Yisrael, yotzim yedei chovam b'nidarim u'nidavot u'b'maser behema. Okay, one thing that you can do is if you made a vow during the year, you can bring your sacrifice on the holiday and then eat the meat from that, assuming, let's say, it was a shlamim. If it wasn't a shlamim, it was an ola. Obviously, you can't eat it. But if it was a shlamim where you can eat the meat, so bring it on the holiday and eat it. And that in that way, you'll fulfill your mitzvah of simcha. Or maaser behema, the 10th of every animal has to be brought to the temple to be sacrificed. But you can eat it yourself. It's kind of like maaser sheni. You have to take a 10th of what you have and eat it in Jerusalem. So in here, in this case, it's sacrifice it in the temple. So that's a great way to kind of kill two birds with one stone, right? You have your nidarim and nidavot you have to bring, and you have your maaser behema, and eat it on the holiday and fulfill your mitzvah. HaKohanim, they have extra meat that they get to eat. What is that? What's that? Chata'ot and hashamot. If I bring a korban chatat, the Kohen gets the meat of the chatat or the asham. Okay, where some of it gets burnt, some of it goes to the Kohen. I don't get to eat anything of it, but the Kohen does. So the Kohen can fulfill their mitzvah with that, or other things that are in the category of matnot kiuna, gifts we give to the Kohen. The bechor, the firstborn of all our animals, goes to the Kohen, and the Kohen has to sacrifice it in the temple. And chazeh v'shok, those are parts of the sacrifice. In each sacrifice you have to give, or some sacrifices you have to give, like in the shlamim, you have to give the chazeh and the shok, to the chest and the thigh to the Kohen. Aval lo ba'ofot v'lo b'menachot. Now they come and tell you, right, for all you vegetarians out there, so it's a bit of a problem. It says you can't fulfill the mitzvah of simcha with, forget about vegetarians, you can't even fulfill it with birds, chicken, anything like that. No meal offerings, has to be meat sacrifices. Okay, I'm not going to say there's no way around that, but that's what the Mishnah says right now. Also, they're talking about in the temple, and they're talking about sacrifices. If you talk about the hierarchy of sacrifices, always the animal sacrifices are at the top there. So now the Gemara starts off with the first question. Olot b'moed ba'ot min chulin. Remember, it said olot on chol moed come from chulin. So now there seems to imply that if you have an ola on yantif, you could buy it for maaser sheni money. That would make no sense. So ela olot b'moed hu deba'ot min chulin. So seems to infer from there habi yom tov min maaser. You could take it on yantif for maaser money. Amai, how could that possibly be? Davar shebechovahi, as I told you before. Ola re'iyah, whether it's the first day of the holiday or the subsequent days of the holiday, either which way, it's an obligation. And what did we learn? Kol davar shebechovah eino ba ela min chulin. Anything that's obligatory, you have to buy with unsanctified funds. So you can't buy it with maaser sheni money. And v'chi tema, maybe it's telling you, maybe it's telling you, you can't bring a korban ola, the olot re'iyah, on the first day of the holiday because it's a yantif. Maybe you can't. Well, Kiman, this is good review. We learned this in Megillah when we talked about the difference between Yom Tov and Shabbos is only Ochel Nefesh, right? That's the one difference. And we learned it in Beitza when we talked about laws of Yantif. Kiman ke Beit Shammai. You want to say our Mishnah is Beit Shammai? If you remember, there was this machloket, Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel. Ditnan. Beit Shammai omrim, mibi'im shlamim ve'en somchim alehem. Avalo olot. Beit Shammai says on a holiday, on the Yantif itself, you're not allowed to bring a korban ola. Why? You could bring a korban shlamim because it gets burnt. It gets eaten by you. So because it gets eaten by you, you're allowed to bring a sacrifice because in the end, it's ochel nefesh. It's for your own eating purposes. And smicha is a separate issue. He says you also can't do smicha on it, but that's an aside. But now he says, but you can't bring a korban ola on yantif because it all gets burnt. It doesn't permit you to eat anything. So if we want to say the reason it said olot b'moed ba'ot min chulin is not to teach you if you bring it on yantif, you can bring it for maaser. Not for sure not. Maybe it's trying to teach you can't bring olot re'iyah on yantif. And that's why it said b'moed on chol moed only. But then that would be Beit Shammai's opinion, and it's very unlikely that we have what we call a stam mishnah, a mishnah that's not attributed to anyone, and it's Beit Shammai's opinion because we don't generally hold that way. So therefore, and Beit Hillel omrim, just to continue in that mishnah, mibi'im shlamim ve'olot v'somchim alehem. Beit Hillel has no problem for you to bring korban shlamim, korban olot. You can bring them on the holiday, and you can even do smicha on the korban shlamim. That's a separate thing. I don't want to get into that right now, but the main point is you can bring korban olah. So then We have number one, it doesn't make sense. It's excluding korbanot olah on yantif. It doesn't make sense. It's saying korbanot olah on yantif you can bring from maser. That wouldn't make any sense. So therefore, the Gemara is stuck. When you're stuck in a mission, you don't understand it. One of the ways of dealing with it is, which is to say, it's missing words, and we're going to add the following words. It's really, when it says olot on the moed, it's talking about two different things. Okay, that one line is really referring to a bunch of different things. The hachi katane, olot nidarim nidavot. In other words, there's olot riyah that you bring on the holiday, and there's also voluntary offerings, as we said before. If I voluntarily say during the year I want to bring certain sacrifices, I vow that I'm going to bring them. I bring them to the temple. I can do it on the holiday, but not on yantif. And that's what that first line is saying. When it said olot on the moed, it means olot nidarim nidavot, vows b'moed ba'ot b'yom tov einam bo. The first line is coming to teach you, number one, you can't bring those on yantif because they're voluntary. You can't bring voluntary things on yantif. Olat re'iyah you could bring because that's an obligation of the day. In fact, we just said, Rabbi Yochanan said, ikar moed is the first day. That's the main time to bring it. And that's the next line. In other words, this one line of olot b'moed ba'ot menachulin splits into two. It really means voluntary ones you can only bring on chol hamoed. Ones that are olat riyah you can bring even not on chol hamoed, even on the holiday, on yantif. But when you bring that olat riyah, eina ba ela menachulin. Since it's obligatory, you can only bring it from unsanctified money. V'shalmei simcha, which is the next line in the Mishnah, ba'in af min ha'maaseh. Now we have the Chagigah Yom Tov Rishon Shel Pesach, Beit Shammai Omrim min ha'chulin, Beit Hillel Omrim min ha'maaseh. That's the second part. We'll get to that in 1 minute. Tanya nami hachi. Now, sometimes you add these words and it sounds like you're making something up. How do you know that's really what the Mishnah was? But if you bring a braita that says the same thing, then it's very good support for the fact that we can say our Mishnah really meant that. And when it got passed down, it just got, some words dropped off. Tanya namihachi, olot nidarimu nidavot b'moed ba'ot. This is going to say exactly what we just said. But here it appears in the bright explicitly and not that we added words. So, olot nidarimu nidavot, right? Voluntary ones only on chol hamoed. B'yom tov einam ba'ot, but not on yantif. V'olat riyah ba'afilu b'yom tov. But the riyah ones can come even on yantif. Ukishi hiba, when you bring them, eina ba ela min ha'chulin, v'shalmei simcha ba'in af min ha'maaseh. That basically says exactly what we just said. Now to the very last line, we'll finish with this. Chagigah Yom Tov Rishon Shel Pesach, Beit Shammai Omrim min ha'chulin, Beit Hillel Omrim min ha'maaseh. Now we have to explain that line in the Mishnah. Ma'ishna Chagigah Yom Tov Rishon Shel Pesach. Why does it specifically talk about that day? And this will remind us of something we learned in Pesachim. If you remember, Pesach night, on Yud Daled, Erev Pesach, you bring a korban Pesach, you eat it at night. Everyone has to have at least a kazayik, but you're also supposed to eat a big meal, eat a la sova. So you're satiated. Now, if you have one animal for a lot of people, you won't be satiated with that one korban Pesach. So what would they do? They would bring, if you remember, Chagigat Yud Daled. They would bring a korban Chagigah. Normally, korban Chagigah is brought on the first day of the holiday, which is Tet Vav of Nisan. But there's also Chagigat Yud Daled, a special halacha just by Pesach, which is what they must be referring to here, which is what the Gemara is going to say. The Mishnah must be referring to it because it's the only thing that comes on the first day of the holiday, which is they would sacrifice Chagigat Yud Daled to basically add meat to the Pesach, to the Seder night eating, so that there would be more meat. Now, you don't have to. It's only if you don't have enough meat. So it's optional. And now you're going to see where this goes. So, Ma'ishna Chagigat Yom Tov Rishon Shel Pesach, Amar Rav Ashi, Ha-kamash malan Chagigat 15 in, Chagigat 14 lo. He's saying this is coming to teach you that Chagigat 15 is not the same as Chagigat, or really Chagigat 14 is not the same as Chagigat 15. I'll read one more line into tomorrow's daf. Alma kasavar Chagigat 14 lav de'oraita. He must hold that it's not de'oraita, this bringing the korban Chagigah on the 14th. Obviously, the 15th is de'oraita. That has to come from chulin. But the one that you bring to add extra meat to your meal is not an obligation by Torah law. If it's not an obligation by Torah law, you can buy it with Maser Sheni money. That's what Beit Hillel says. We'll have to understand later what Beit Shammai holds, why they think it has to come from chulin only. So we'll stop here for today. We'll finish with this topic in tomorrow's class. Have a great day, everybody.